Hello, this is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com. This is a topical talk. We're going to be talking about Pelléas et Mélisande by everybody, every famous composer who did a setting of Pelléas et Mélisande. And there were four of them. There was Debussy, Schoenberg, Sibelius, and Gabriel Fauré. They all did versions of Pelléas et Mélisande, the play. Debussy did an opera. Schoenberg did a symphonic poem. And both the Fauré and Sibelius are incidental music for actual theatrical productions. Now, the play was by Maurice Maeterlinck, and it's a symbolist play. Symbolism just means fairy tales theoretically for grown-ups. They're just as silly as children's fairy tales and just as vaporous and illogical. But they're supposed to be for grown-ups. They're supposed to be very suggestive, usually about things like sex. That's usually the thing you could be suggestive about. And death, or sex that leads to death. Those are sort of the way these things work. And that's how Pelléas et Mélisande works. So what happens is, let me give you a little overview of the story so you know what's going on. It's really very, very simple, although it gets stretched out to an inordinate length. There's this kingdom called le monde, which means something like the whole world in French, right? It's a kingdom. There's a castle. It's in a forest. No one knows exactly where it is or why it is or what anyone's doing there. And there's an old king who's blind, and the queen, Geneviève, the king's name is Arkle, and there are two half-brothers, Golod and Pelléas, and they're sort of friendly and they get along well and everything's just fine. And then there's this little kid named Ignold who's running around a lot. No one's quite sure why, but they use him later. Anyway, so here's the deal. Golod is out running around in the woods, or he's hunting or doing whatever kings do in the woods. Or he's a prince, actually. And he gets lost. And he finds this girl sitting by a well or a stream crying. And he goes to comfort her, and she says her name is Mélisande. Now, in the opera quiz that they used to do at intermission during, the Met opera broadcast, one of the quiz questions was, who was the dumbest character in all of opera? And Mélisande won, hands down. She is the stupidest character in all of opera. Golod asks her some very basic questions, like, what's your name? She says, Mélisande. Where are you from? She doesn't know. Why are you here? Oh, I dropped my crown in the pond. Well, why did you drop your crown in the pond? I don't know. Then she says, ne me touchez pas, ou je me jette au l'eau. Dans l'eau, au l'eau, somewhere in the low. She says, don't touch me or I'll throw myself in the water. So he says, she must be a princess. I'm going to take her home and marry her. So she does. Marry him. No one knows why. She doesn't love him particularly. He's actually kind of a nice guy and, wants her to love him, but she can't ever explain anything. Meanwhile, his brother Pelléas comes home from wherever he was and meets Mélisande, and they fall madly in love. Well, that sets up the love triangle, which results in Golod taking the little brat, Ignold, and shoving him up a window to watch Pelléas and Mélisande make out, which infuriates Golod, so he kills his brother Pelléas and spends a lot of time pulling Mélisande's hair to get her to say that she loves him, which she won't, because she doesn't know. And then she's pregnant, and she dies in childbirth. And he's begging her to say who the father is, and she doesn't know. And she doesn't know how she got pregnant. And I don't think she even knows what pregnancy is. And so she has the baby, and she dies. And that's the story. Do we need to know any more than that? No, I don't think we do. It's an absolutely ridiculous story, but it's full of magic. It has magic. It has half tints. It has a heroine. I happen to know where Mélisande came from, by the way. They don't tell you in any plot synopsis, but where Mélisande came from is Ariane et Barbe Bleue. This is an opera by Paul Dukas, and another play by Maurice Maeterlinck. And it turns out that Bluebeard, remember Bluebeard is in Bluebeard's Castle, Bartók's opera about Bluebeard, where he has all these wives hidden behind, his castle. They all want to see what he has in his rooms, and they force him to open up his doors until they open the one where they have to go in the dungeon and spend the rest of their lives there. That Bluebeard's Castle, right? Well, one of the wives is named Mélisande. That's Mélisande. She was one of Bluebeard's wives, except in Maurice Maeterlinck's version of the story, it's kind of a Me Too opera, if you want to call it that, because Ariane, in this case, gets all the wives together and gives them a rousing women's independence speech, and they rebel and tie up Bluebeard and run away. And obviously Mélisande, who was an idiot to begin with, got lost somewhere in the forest, and her crown fell off, and Golod found her, and the rest is history. So if you're wondering where Mélisande came from, you have to listen to Ducas's very beautiful opera, Ariane et Barbe Bleue. This is the Leon Botstein recording on Telarc. It's excellent. There's also another really terrific one on Erato. I mean, you're in business for performances of the Ducas opera. But we're talking about Pelléas et Mélisande, and first, the opera by Claude Debussy. And the recording that I would recommend, if I turn it around correctly, is Herbert von Karajan. It's one of his really, really greatest operas. It's absolutely first rate with an amazing cast. You've got Richard Stilwell as Pelléas, and Frederica von Stade as Mélisande, and José Van Damme as Golod. And they're all absolutely wonderful. And the performance it's the Berlin Philharmonic, it's Karajan at his absolute best as an accompanist, which he really was a great accompanist in opera. He really was. I mean, it's just absolutely gorgeous. And it's the kind of thing that he does really well, because it's just full of beautiful, evocative sounds and subdued dynamics with delicately shifting colors and luscious string textures, and it's just yummy. So if you want to get the opera, I would recommend getting the Karajan and EMI. Now, we will at some point talk about the opera as an opera, in which case there are like half a dozen other versions you need to know about. But for your Pelléas et Mélisande collection, which is what we're talking about, Karajan's your guy, and you'll be very, very happy. Now, this was all happening, by the way, around the turn of the century when this opera was written, the 20th century, right? 1900, 1905, in that area. And so, at the same time as Debussy was putting the finishing touches on his opera, Arnold Schoenberg was writing a tone poem on the subject of Pelléas et Mélisande. And of course, the topic is perfect for a tone poem about nothing in particular, because it's about nothing in particular. And the opera itself, I mean, that is the play itself, is so vague that music without words can only be more specific in terms of trying to hone in on the feelings and situations that the play describes. But of course, this being Schoenberg, he was out to create a piece of music that is every bit as vaporous as the story itself. And so he wrote this very radical piece, Pelléas et Mélisande. He wasn't yet in his serial or atonal phase. This is his late super duper ultra chromatic phase. It's kind of like Verklärte Nacht, Transfigured Night, the string sextet or string orchestra piece. It's very chromatic. It's like sludge. I'm sorry, I hate to call it that, but if you like chromatic sludge, you're going to love Pelléas et Mélisande. It's dark and brooding and grotty, and it doesn't really have any easily definable melodic ideas, but it does have some trombone glissandos that were considered quite radical in their day. And it's funny, because the best performance of Pelléas and Mélisande, Pelléas und Mélisande, if you're German, is Karajan again. It was one of those, this was his, second Viennese school box that he paid for himself, because Deutsche Grammophon wouldn't do it, and he felt really strongly about it, and he rehearsed at the orchestra to within an inch of its life and gave out these stunning performances of Berg, Webern, and Schoenberg. And in some ways, they've been matched perhaps, but they've never been equaled. I mean, never surpassed for sure. So if you want Pelléas and Mélisande and Verkleerdernacht, if you want the Schoenberg Chromatic Sludge album, then I recommend this very, very strongly. Herbert von Karajan and the Berlin Philharmonic on Deutsche Grammophon. You can't go wrong. And it's actually fun to listen to if you know the Debussy, because it's the same story, and sort of noticeably the same story. You get a sense of things happening, and you can try and match them up with the opera, or you can ignore it completely and just listen to it for what it is. So that's that. Meanwhile, back in the theater and in France, Fauré was writing some incidental music to Pelléas and Mélisande. Now, this being Fauré, of course, it's very restrained. It's very, very pretty. There are only 1, 2, 3, 4 movements and a couple songs. There's a chanson de Mélisande, and she sits at her little spinning wheel doing spinning things. But this has the famous Sicilienne. Do 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 ba ba da 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 da. Wasn't that beautiful? It's been arranged for like 7 billion instruments, and this is the best recording of it, hands down. Ozawa Boston Symphony with other Fauré music. It's gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous. It was actually orchestrated by Charles Koechlin, by the way, because Fauré couldn't be bothered to do it. But it's a lovely little suite in 5 movements, or depending whether you do the vocal bits, 4 movements, and everyone should have it. The most notable, pieces are the spinning wheel thing and the death of Mélisande, which is the last movement, which is very, very touching. Her death is always touching. It's incredibly touching and subdued, and because she doesn't know why she's dying, of course. She doesn't know that. She doesn't even know that she's dying. She doesn't know that she gave birth. Never mind. Anyway, all the way up north, this play had made its way to Scandinavia, and Sibelius did actually one of his greatest suites of incidental music is Pelléas and Mélisande. This has a whole bunch of tracks in it. It's something like 8 or 9 or 10 tracks. It's a very, very complete score. It's really almost a tone poem, but in individual little movements, gorgeous. And here, whereas the spinning scene in Fauré is very sweet and very French, here it's like creepy and sinister. It has an English horn or an oboe or one of those things, double reeds going na na na, as the strings spin around and yeah. I mean, something awful is about to happen. It's just terrific. And there's some other really, really beautiful movements. I mean, the opening at the castle gate, and there's an entr'acte that's just delightful, and it's great music. It's great music from start to finish. And this is a fantastic performance. This is Paavo Järvi with the Estonian National Symphony Orchestra. It was on Virgin Classics, but it's in that little blue box of all of his Sibelius stuff, which if you can get it, is great. It's worth having. And this comes with The Maiden in the Tower, Sibelius's only opera. Another opera. This has a plot that is about as meaningful as Pelléas and Mélisande. What happens is there's a maiden, and she's in a tower. That's the plot. She gets to go home later. Now we know why Sibelius didn't write any operas. You can tell. But the music is vintage Sibelius. It's quite beautiful. Absolutely lovely. And so this is a great disc to get for Sibelius collectors, too, if you want to fill in the gaps in your Sibelius collection, because there haven't been many recordings of The Maiden in the Tower, unsurprisingly. It's only a 30-minute long opera, and it was written for some sort of like ladies' club luncheon or something. So, it's not something that you need to sweat very much when you're listening to. But this is a great disc, and it is Sibelius's Pelléas et Mélisande. So now you have all 4 major settings of Pelléas and Mélisande in absolutely first-rate recordings, if that's where your interests take you. And I hope that this is going to be the first in, a bunch of chats that are going to be sort of thematically based rather than just going through piles of records and exhaustive discographies, because much as I love that, I do. It's fun. And it gives me a chance to go through my collection and see what's still there, and find everything. I also think it's wonderful that, we can put together some talks about musical subjects that are a little bit more wide-ranging and perhaps more interesting. So I recommend Pelléas et Mélisande very highly. It was a genuine cultural moment in the musical history of the early 20th century, and you owe it to yourself to hear every single setting of it that you can get your hands on. So please, folks, keep on listening, and thank you so much for joining me. If you enjoyed this chat, please subscribe to my YouTube channel.